Alright, so I don't know if you've read the title of the episode or you haven't. Maybe it was just one of those ones that just popped up and you weren't sure. But either way, just as it's a relationship podcast, I'm supposed to talk about relationships. But before I get to that, we need to talk about something real quick. Now, apparently, according to the government of Qatar, World Cup fans could be sentenced up to 7 years in prison if they're caught having a one-night stand during the World Cup. Now, I'm trying to think about this shit and I'm asking myself if it applies only to the fans or if it applies to the players as well, because you kind of think about it, it's like the most stressful, high pressure time for any football player that happens to be representing his country at that time. And if you're an African that watched the World Cup when it was in South Africa, then you probably resonate with this information better than anyone else. So now you're telling me that the players that are going to be under a lot of stress in high pressure situations cannot relieve themselves of their stress in the most pleasurable way possible because the Qatar government does not want it? The fuck?
Get ready for the battle of the sexes.
I don't know if you guys remember, like there was this whole talk about how, I think it was Germany during the last World Cup. Apparently, their players didn't have sex for like 7 or 8 weeks or some shit. And the Brazilian guys were literally having sex for a while. I think the only time they stopped were like maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of days to their actual matches. And you kind of think about it, like that's almost like a strategy that kind of falls into place when it comes to things like the World Cup. Because some people believe that semen retention for all of those weeks makes them more aggressive and, stronger and more powerful and shit. And others believe, empty everything. Then when the time comes, you let them hold on to that shit, then they'll be more powerful. And in some ways, that is a tactic of its own. It is, a part of the strategy. That's kind of how coaches will coach. So now taking that out of everyone's hands when they go to Qatar is going to be a little bit hard, because imagine it's player who's in like stress, so now they've ended up calling an escort, asking them to dress up like like a team doctor or some shit. So as they're busy taking them up to the hotel room, they're busy being stopped at the reception and the hotel manager is busy telling them, "Hey Habibi, I am sorry, but you cannot take this young lady upstairs. Yes, I can understand you say that she's team doctor, but we don't allow that." And that time the guy is like, "Oi mate, you can't possibly be telling me that I cannot get my team doctor upstairs to help me out. My leg's been killing me, bruv." And that time the hotel manager's busy looking at him like, "Hey Habibi, Mr. Rashford, it is not me that has said no. It is Qatar government. It is Qatar government. But please, you can go upstairs, you can stretch yourself out, and you can also call a male team doctor to stretch you out. And we have access to Pornhub over Wi-Fi. We don't restrict, and you can access it whenever, and it is completely private." Eh? And at that point in time, he will realize that shit hit the legal fan, and he cannot take this babe upstairs. And as he's checking into his room, he'll probably find that he's been restocked with even more lotion. Because in as much as one night stands are outlawed, it's not like they said anything about masturbation. Although my bigger question is, how will they be able to curb the gay sex that will be happening there? Because it's not like every single footballer is straight. But I guess that's a question that they'll probably have to figure out when the footballers go for the World Cup. And if something comes up, I will probably be able to talk about it on the podcast, which I definitely should have started in my very typical fashion, where I start by saying, "Welcome to Breaktime on West Side, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya." The man on the mic is a man who once wanted to bang the Croatian president because diplomatic immunity, bitches. He's a man who sort of likes women's football because things jiggle. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show is Battle of the Sexes, our weekly love, sex, and relationships show where I get to talk about relationships. I get to give a weird view. Some people might get pissed, but normally I come to some sort of a conclusion. Now, whether you agree or you disagree with what it is that I say or what it is that I conclude, your views are very open and welcome. Your feedback is always welcome. On IG, it is at Breaktime on West Side. On Facebook, it is also at Breaktime on West Side. And on Twitter, you can slide into my personal DMs, which is at Bagaka the D. The DMs are always open, they're always accepted. And if we turn what it is that we discuss in the DMs into an actual topic of its own, then even the better. Now, if you are listening through an app that allows for ratings and or reviews, a nice rating and or review, whether positive, whether negative, will be highly appreciated. Helps me stay up on the charts and, kind of gives me a nice feel of what it is that people feel about the podcast so that I can see if I need to make any changes, if I don't need to make any, and, I can move some things up and some things down. And if you are using one of those apps, then a nice rating and or review would be highly appreciated, so that I can continue calling myself a chart-topping podcaster. But anyways, all of that said and done, we do have a particularly interesting topic to discuss with some very interesting characters. But before I get to that, we need to talk about R.Kelly for a little bit. Now, for those of y'all that know, or for those of y'all that lived under some version of an online rock, you'd probably not know, but R.Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison on racketeering and sexual trafficking charges. Now, this was done sometime last week, and a bunch of people rejoiced and celebrated. And as usual, some very emotional women also decided to come out and say that it wasn't enough time, he should be in there for longer and shit. And I guess, maybe by some account you could be right, but the fact that he is going to prison, and he's not just going to prison for a short period of time like some of these fraud guys or the guys that were behind the whole financial crisis and shit. Like, this guy is going in for 3 straight decades. Now, I checked his age, he's 55 years old, so he should be leaving when he's around 85, not unless if he leaves earlier for shit like good behavior or some shit. And if anything, I feel like that's a win, because at 85 years old, I don't think his dick will be coming up all that often. So I don't even think that he will be going for any kids. So I feel like that's a win. But all that said and done, I just have one question, and I'm sure it's gonna piss some people off, but I have to ask it because I feel like it's something that we need to probably discuss at this point in time, now that he has been sentenced to 30 years in jail. Considering that he has now been convicted, can we now start listening to R.Kelly songs in public freely without fear of condemnation or being called an apologist or pro R.Kelly or some shit? Like, can we please just do that now? Because I am sick and tired of having this argument with people over, oh, you shouldn't be listening to R.Kelly music, oh, you're enabling him, blah, blah, blah. Like, it got to a point where I ended up talking about it on this podcast, and I ended up saying, you know what, if you guys feel like we're enabling him by listening to his music on streaming sites, which will end up paying him and shit, then he can continue committing his acts, how about we just pirate his music? People will not make money off of that because, pirating and shit, and he doesn't get the benefit. But now that he's in prison, it's not like he's going to need his money in prison, and it's not like he's going to continue recording girls from prison. So back to my question, can we now start listening to R.Kelly songs freely without any condemnation? And I can get there's some people that are still pretty emotional about what it is that he did. Don't get me wrong, I also do feel like he did a very, very bad thing. He did very bad things to small children and shit. And for that, I do believe that yes, he probably should be convicted. But there's some shit that I've been seeing some people writing online which has been driving me the wrong way. People busy talking about how they're never listening to R. Kelly's songs because now it's stuck in their minds that every single time R. Kelly was busy talking about some sexual fantasy shit that he'd want to do, he was busy, singing that about a bunch of little girls. And honestly, I do not know whether to consider these people ignorant or possibly a little bit dumb. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't know whatever the fuck the guy was actually thinking about when he was singing, all of the songs that he'd sing. But I don't think that they were all just centered around him doing shit with little kids. Like, it's not like what he would do would necessarily reflect in the music that he had. Like, the guy was a very talented artist. He songwrote a lot of massive songs. He created massive hits, and his albums were massive successes. Does that mean that he was only talking about little kids? No. This guy talked about a lot of shit. Like, when the guy is busy talking about when a woman loves, she loves for real, it's not like he was talking about doing some shit with Aaliyah from back in the day. Like, you can't necessarily think that it's always going to be about some kid that he was possibly doing some sexual shit with, It's almost like thinking that every single time you go for mass and there's one of these top tier priests busy preaching and shit, they're probably gonna be talking about fucking young boys. And that's usually not the case. It's not like you're gonna go for mass and then you're just gonna see one of these priests just walking up slowly to the pulpit and then all of a sudden they're like, I like to rape small boys. I usually like them 9 years old. Like, it's not like that's what's gonna happen. Like, if they can separate what it is that they do behind closed doors from what it is that they will tell you on a pulpit, I believe R.Kelly can also separate what it is that he does, behind the camera, whether it's pissing on a kid or having sex with a minor, from the music that he will push out in the studio to the rest of the public. I honestly feel like he can separate the two, and I feel like we can probably separate the two. Did he do bad acts? Yes. Does that mean that his music was shit? No. I believe you can hate what it is that he did but still love his music in the same exact way. Seems complicated, seems contradictory, but we're human beings, and most of y'all that are listening to this are probably adults, so you can definitely be both instead of just supporting one or the other. But anyways, all that said and done, I will leave it at that, and I will move it to our main topic of today. Now, for those of y'all that have listened to me for a while, and for those of y'all that know me even on a personal level, y'all know that I hate motivational speakers. Like, the typical idea of the motivational speaker is something that I absolutely loathe, just mainly because of what it is that they do. The whole thing of saying that they started their butchery with nothing but a knife and the picture of a cow, the whole telling other people that, they can do the same exact thing as them, all they need is 2 paper clips, a couple of printed paper, and probably all 6 of their programs on self-mastery and self-improvement and shit. Like, it pretty much feels like a capitalization on people's desire to be better and the hope that they have to be better. And the thing is, people feel like they're automatically better because of it, yet about a month later they'll probably go back to the same old feeling of not wanting to do the same exact shit, and then it's like they go to another motivational speaker. And I personally just loathe that sort of parasitic behavior. But very recently, I stumbled upon a motivational speaker that I can probably define as like the anti-motivational speaker, because she sort of speaks about shit in sort of a negative light. So I guess maybe to a certain degree she might be a motivational speaker, or at least she says so on her Instagram bio, but I don't know how much motivation she's giving. Now, I recently stumbled upon a clip of hers where she was busy talking about why it is she doesn't want to get into a relationship, and I will say that her comments were very, very negative. Her responses seemed particularly negative. Now, I'm gonna play it for you guys, and then we're gonna look into what exactly she said, just the same way we always do it. So, here it is.
Yep. That's exactly why I don't have a man. I don't be itching, crying, burning, or stressing either. I don't be going through phone looking for evidence because niggas acting like a fucking fool. I don't be going half on bills with nobody as if I'm their roommate. I don't be dealing with nobody fucking kids. I don't be worried about him still fucking his exes. I don't be worried about where a nigga is when he's not with me. I don't have a man and I'm living my best fucking life. Trust and believe that. I don't have one because I don't want one. They're not a prized possession. It's not what it used to be. Or it's not what people think it is. It's work. It's hell. Relationships are hell. And that's why I don't have a man. Because I'm not going to live in hell. I'm too nice. I'm too beautiful to live in hell. Fuck you.
Okay. She doesn't want to live in hell. I guess that's good motivation in some way. But anyways, let me not sort of sound like I'm mocking her. And if anything, I will try and avoid the whole bits that seem like mockery, so I'm not gonna talk about her beauty, I'm not gonna say shit. But for those of y'all that want to know who she is, her name is Kim Moore, and that's Moore with 2 O's. And interestingly enough, she actually even has an OnlyFans. Okay, this one's an interesting motivational speaker. You don't have a life coach and a motivational speaker who has an OnlyFans, so it does kind of seem particularly interesting. But anyways, what she does aside, this is something particularly interesting that I'm listening to, because it's something that I'm sort of hearing more and more on a daily basis. Like, she's been talking about how she doesn't want a guy, she doesn't want to be with a man, she doesn't want to go through all the stress and the hassle and everything. And while what it is that she's saying seems like it's an isolated thing, or it's something that's only with women, at least nowadays, it's something that I've also noticed with guys, because I actually stumbled upon a very interesting article sometime this past week on Kenyan guys who've actually decided to stay bachelors for the long haul. They are not trying to get married, they're not trying to get into any relationships, and they've just chosen to stay single and stay as bachelors. And it was about 4 different cases of guys, and they were busy talking about why it is they had wanted to do that and why it is they chose to do that. I think it was only the last one who was fairly young, and he was like, he's open to getting into a relationship and marrying in the future, just not right now, because he is building a firm, stable foundation for himself and, you know, for his future family and shit. And I guess that last one I can probably resonate with because it's something I feel to my core. But all the others were busy talking about not getting into a relationship. And these sentiments are pretty much on both ends, men and women. And while some people will definitely expect me to be like, no, this isn't how it is, oh, you should be in a relationship, relationships are great. Well, I kind of have to start by saying that they're not completely wrong. You know, relationships are a lot of work. Relationships can be hell. You know, relationships can involve you taking quite a lot of shit in the name of what it is that this babe was talking about. And all of that is true. All of that is stuff that people go through regardless of gender. I guess it's just that women mostly expect the cheating scandals to be an issue, the whole having friends thing be an issue. You know, guys will sort of have the whole issue with, you know, how it is that she treats him and shit. And I guess the cheating bit is now starting to become more and more of a thing, you know, the bestie problem and everything. And to a certain degree, I guess both sides are sort of fed up. You know, there's single people on both ends of the gender scale that are definitely fed up with the idea of relationships. But while they are right about it all, while this babe is right about everything, I feel like she's also quite wrong about all of it. Like, don't get me wrong, absolutely everything that she said is dead true. It's smack on true. The only thing is, she's sort of using a general idea of relationships based off of what I'd call the loudest examples, and she's using it to come up with an idea of what a relationship is and is describing it as hell. Now, while she isn't wrong about some relationships actually being hell, I do believe that some relationships are heaven. But I feel like the best relationships, the most long-lasting, long-term, happiest ones, are a combination of both heaven and hell. Because to some degree, you kind of have to get to hell so that you can really appreciate heaven in and of itself. Or at least that's how most of us human beings are. You don't appreciate the good, not unless if you've actually gone through the bad. And that's something that you will see replicated time and time again. You know, you hear babes who are in relationships with guys and it's literally all chill, there's no problems, he's never trying to get into a fight, so he can be very agreeable. And then all of a sudden she's ending the relationship and she's like, the relationship got boring. But there's a babe who will be mistreated, who will be abused, that will want to be in a relationship like that, where there's a lot less fighting and there's a lot more loving involved. And in some ways, you kind of have to look at that and you kind of have to realize that sometimes you have to taste a little bit of hell so that you can actually appreciate heaven. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not glorifying hell in relationships. I am not glorifying treating your partner like shit or being taken through shit and staying there. Don't get me wrong, I am not. What I am saying is, sometimes people get a warped view of things such as relationships based off of things like PTSD, and that PTSD might be theirs, or it might be someone or some people close to theirs as PTSD that they've sort of picked up. And as a result of that, it makes people more fearful of things that haven't even happened yet. You find people busy talking about how they don't want to get into a relationship because everyone cheats. Like, yes, all 4 of your friends have been cheated on, but what if it's the choice of niggas that they've been with? Like, what if all 4 of them are generally shit girlfriends? What if they didn't know how to please them, or they didn't really listen to what it is that they wanted as guys? Probably the issue is them as the girlfriends instead of these guys as the guys. Not that I'm endorsing the cheating. Sometimes, you know, you might look at your male friends and they're like, oh, you know, relationships are shit and everything, and you decide to resonate it with them because like 2 of them had their girlfriends cheat on them and the other 3 are single niggas that are all about being on their own. You know, they're part of the whole, you know, men going their own way movement. And you're like, you know what, I'm not gonna get into a relationship because babes are bad. Like, why the fuck are you making a judgment on something that you haven't gone through? And those are individual scenarios. It doesn't mean that it's a collective thing for everyone. Sometimes people end up looking at experiences from someone else's lens and then they start making their own conclusions based on what someone said about their side of the story. You know, I'm gonna admit it. There's guys that will say, oh, being in relationships is bad, blah, blah, blah. But some of these niggas are the ones that cheat on their girlfriends. And yet you want to follow whatever it is that they're saying? Come on, bruh. Like, we have to make our own decisions. Some of us have to go through some of these shits ourselves so that we can decide whether we want to go in as well. And if anything, this whole idea of quote-unquote living your best life and you're going single and shit, while it is good, most of the time the idea of what people say is living your best life is some shit that will probably fade in terms of the joy it gives you in like what? 2, maybe 3 years or some shit, because it's not like you can be making money and traveling the world on your own for like 10-20 years straight. I don't think that's a particularly interesting way to live for 20 straight years. And you'll probably decide not to be with someone because you've seen what your friends and your family members have gone through. But if you're not using that to make the next relationship you're in better, then you're probably not really playing the game at all, so it's not like you're really winning. And at the end of the day, we have to accept that sometimes you have to go through hell. You have to put in that work in the relationship. And sometimes it might turn to shit, but sometimes it can produce something really beautiful. The thing is, you have to chase the beautiful, even though sometimes you have to take the shit. And it's unfortunate that some people feel like they're winning by not playing the game. But all in all, let me just conclude by saying this. Yes, relationships can be hell. Yes, relationships will require quite a lot of work. And yes, relationships can sometimes make you feel like you have zero freedom and you have to be accountable to someone else. But at the end of the day, relationships, if done well, if the people in it decide to act right, if the people in it actually decide to make it work, can actually turn it into a very beautiful thing. So even though it might have been hell, it could be heaven for the most part. Even though you might feel like, your freedom is hindered to a certain degree and you have to be accountable to a person, if you actually do enjoy being with that person, then there's a pretty good chance that it won't really hurt all that much, if ever at all. But then again, I am someone who hasn't been in a relationship for too long, so maybe I might be wrong about all of this shit. So I want your thoughts on this. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. On Facebook, it is also at Breaktime on Westside. And on Twitter, you can slide into my personal DMs, which is at Bagaka the D. Thank you very much for listening all the way till the end. And if you are listening to Castbox, feel free to drop your thoughts and comments below, and I will attend to them accordingly. And I will catch you guys on the next break.